The Holocaust by Mallory Jackson, Ashley Jordan, Carly Thurman, and Kaylee Mobley, and narrated by Ashley Jordan. The Holocaust made its way into history after World War II in the 1930s through the 1940s. In 1933, the Jewish population in Nazi-occupied Germany was well over 9 million. The government in Germany was weak, and the people didn't have faith that their government could run efficiently. Since there was no set leader of the country, Adolf Hitler made his way to power of Germany to try and help his country out of their depression. Before Hitler was leader of Germany, he was appointed Chancellor of Germany, meaning he was the head of the government. When he came into power, he bought his party called the Nazis. Hitler was a strong speaker and made people believe that he had the best interest of his country in mind. He led people to believe that he was going to bring Germany a better life than they had before the war. He appealed to the people of the lower class and unemployed the most. Hitler finally got all the support that he needed, and he started to incorporate his plan, the Final Solution. The Final Solution included killing millions of Jews and anyone that did not fit Hitler's preferences. The Final Solution started to take control in 1941. The Jews and the people that Hitler did not approve were sent to the ghettos, which were concentration camps. The purpose of these camps were to keep all the Jews together and control them. One of the biggest concentration camps was Auschwitz, which started being built in 1940. In 1942, Auschwitz would begin to hold prisoners and become the center of mass destruction of everyone that Hitler sent to confinement. Auschwitz was the largest concentration camp, and Nazis sent people there to be killed. It could hold up to 150,000 inmates at a time. The camp was 40 square kilometers and had a radius of 5 kilometers for isolation. Inside the camp, there were 28 buildings, and all were 2 stories. There were 9 watchtowers or barbed electric wire all around the camp. Escaping was nearly impossible to do. Since the concentration camp was so big, it was divided into 3 parts. Auschwitz was a base and the central office. It was also the smallest section of the camp. When the prisoners walked into Auschwitz, they would see a sign that would say, "Arbeit macht frei," which means work will give you freedom. Jews and the other people that were put into the camps were led to believe that if they worked hard, they were going to eventually get set free. This section held living quarters, the prisoners' kitchen, administration buildings, guard stations, a ceremony, and gas chambers. Auschwitz II was built in 1942 to allow more room for prisoners. It was the largest section of the camp and could hold up to 200,000 inmates. There were 250 barracks for the prisoners to live in, and they were originally meant for only 800 to 1,000 occupants. When Hitler started targeting Jewish women also, the Nazis had to make a section of the barracks and camp for women. There were approximately 15,000 women that were confined to work, and the conditions of Auschwitz II were way worse than the other sections. Running water and necessary sanitary items were not present, and because of that, disease spread quickly. Gas chambers were also present in Auschwitz II, and they were located by the barracks. Nazis wanted to make sure that the Jews had a constant reminder that their lives could end whenever the soldiers left. Also in Auschwitz II, medical experiments were conducted on prisoners that had already died or been killed in gas chambers or by cremation. Auschwitz III was very small. Its main purpose was to produce synthetic fuels and rubbers. The concentration camps were overcrowded and unsanitary. Inmates didn't have beds that they could sleep on, and some had to sleep on the ground or make their own bed. There was a punishment by a guard if the bed wasn't made satisfactory to the guard's liking. Every day there was a roll call, and the prisoners would stand outside of their barracks to hear their name being called. At this roll call, prisoners get their rations for breakfast. The inmates could stand for roll call in bad weather for hours at a time. Following breakfast, there was another roll call, and there was for prisoners to get into their work groups. The work days were anywhere from 10 to 12 hours long, and the prisoners got barely minimum for lunch. The prisoners wore striped dresses or suits that did not get changed or washed for months at a time. The Nazis' things called penal roll calls, where people would have to stand outside and roll call all night as a collective punishment for one prisoner's bad behavior. These roll calls could consist of beating and shootings of prisoners. Jewish people were not access to a lot of things. They got denied national health care, legal qualifications, and military service. Jewish women were required by law to have abortions. The Jewish people could not teach, be accountants, or dentists. The mass killings began shortly after Auschwitz was built and finished. Gassing the prisoners to death was the most common way for the Nazis to kill the Jews off. Approximately 1.5 million Jews were shot to death during the Holocaust. Thousands of them died from hunger in the camps. Nazis would have the Jews working as hard as they could with the food they were promised. The Jews would work so hard for their meals, only to realize that the meal wasn't coming. Some of the Jews would drop dead from hunger in the middle of the workday. When the war was finally coming to an end, guards from the concentration camps would try to move as many prisoners as possible. These rides were called the Death Marches, and it was an attempt to keep Allied forces from saving a large number of the prisoners. Finally, German forces surrendered to the Allied forces in 1945, and the Holocaust was over. The Holocaust was over when the prisoners had to survive stayed in the shelters supplied by the Allied powers. Approximately 6 million Jews were killed. The number of deaths is presumed to be higher since some of the bodies were burned in crematory chambers. Also, the death of Jews and other people considered by the racial inferior by Hitler took place over a 4-year period. After the Holocaust came to an end, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. The Holocaust is still considered one of the largest mass killings in history.